What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Strackbine, joined by my main man, Steven Thompson. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they finalize week 3 of organized team activities. We head into mandatory minicamp, We got plenty to talk about. Obviously, the quarterback competition, who stood out at wide receiver this week, who are some sleepers that you should start paying attention to on the Pittsburgh Steelers roster, and obviously our biggest takeaways from week 3 on the South Side. It's been a beautiful week. Vibes were good. It was really nice this week to kind of get back out there and kind of, just watch some football. And I know we've said that for 2 weeks now, but this one just felt different. This one felt like the energy was high. The guys were rowdy and on the field, and the camaraderie was really coming together in week 3 of OTAs. How you feeling, my friend?
I feel great, and I kind of agree with you on that one. I think the competition was really high. I think there were some great competitive moments that I think the coaching staff tried to create, and I think the players really responded to it. Like you said, the vibes were just really high. The energy was really high. Everyone was happy to be out there enjoying it, enjoying the work. It's kind of easy to do when you're just kind of competing against one another, and there's just it's hard for something to go wrong in OTAs. So I think they're just enjoying their time. Well, everything's kind of all sunshine and rainbows while they can.
Yeah. In the words of Mike Tomlin, if you look bad during OTAs or during helmets and shorts, there's an issue. So I'm glad that the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't look bad. They looked pretty good. There was a lot to take away. There were moments of, that's a little bit sloppy. And I think when you watch the quarterback competition, and we'll dive into it, it wasn't always as glamorous as maybe everybody hoped so. But there was a lot of good that came out of OTAs, a lot of potential in this football team. And really, there were moments where you looked at them and said, yeah, this is a good team. This is going to be a good year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll dive into all that. We'll start with our biggest takeaways. We've been there for 3 weeks. I think, just like you said, week 3 was a big one. The George Pickens shows up the final day. You get Cam Sutton, arrives, signs, and is on the field all within seemingly an hour or two. Plenty of competition. You kind of saw some adjustments being made when it came to positions like the offensive line, running back, that kind of stuff. Things just started to come into fruition. What was your biggest takeaway from week 3 of OTAs?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway was the Cams, and you kind of alluded to it, but it's Cam Hayward and Cam Sutton both hitting the field. Kind of different things going on there. I mean, Cam was obviously a little bit of a surprise. I don't think I expected to see him out there during OTAs, but seeing him out there was really cool. And I think the guys, like you said, I don't think what we talked about, the energy, the vibes being really high, the level of competition, I think there's kind of a direct correlation between Cam Hayward being there and the guys responding to it. I mean, George Pickens coming back this week. I don't think it was coincidence that, he's back the same week that Cam Hayward is. I think there was kind of it was a bit of a rallying call. I think Cam being there just gave everyone a shot in the arm, reminded them why they're there. Even a guy who's going through these difficult contract negotiations, a little bit at odds with the team in certain ways, not to say that, they hate each other, but, obviously there's some tension there. There's a tension there. It's not anything significant, but it's real. But even he is out there, trying to give his all because he recognizes that this is an important year. This team has the potential to do something special, and he believes the work is important. And I think all of the guys responded there. And I think you can say something somewhat similar about the Cam Sutton signing. I mean, I know everyone outside the building may have some complicated feelings about that signing, but at least inside the team, there is a lot of excitement. People were eager to have Cam back. They were excited. I think they feel like they've got kind of that missing link as on the back end of the secondary when they have Cam Sutton in there. So I think for all those reasons, things were really positive for the Steelers this week. And those two guys getting back on the field was a big shot in the arm for everyone on the roster.
Yeah, I agree. I think starting with the Cam Hayward, him showing up was definitely a surprise, but Mike Tomlin going over them posing for pictures. And then I even talked to Jaylen Warren yesterday, and he was asked about his contract situation going into a contract year and if he even cares. And he said, no, I truthfully, I could care less. He said, I'm trying to win a Super Bowl. Everybody else here is trying to win a Super Bowl. I feel like that's the response of this team right now is you got a lot of guys that are here on 1-year deals or here just because they want to win a Super Bowl and they feel like this team could go and win a Super Bowl. And I think that's very, very important when it comes to a team actually making a push later in the season. Is, are you here for the right reasons? Are you here to compete? And I'm not saying anybody in the NFL is here for the wrong reasons, but it helps. It definitely helps when you have a team that is solely focused on winning and feels like they have something special and they're willing to do what they need to do to contribute to that special team. I feel like that goes a long way, especially when you get into games against the Ravens, games against Cincinnati, games against Buffalo, games against Kansas City, and then you head into the playoffs and things get crazy. I think that certainly helps when it comes to just being a competitor and making something special. You know, you watch teams in the past, not to bring up bad memories for you, but the Philadelphia Eagles is the one that's going to stand out the most, I think. Is that team wasn't the most talented team on the football field, was going up against the biggest powerhouse in the NFL, but they had more heart than probably anybody in football, and that went a long way. And I think the Steelers kind of look like a team that has that much heart, which is very promising. I think that definitely plays a major role in how far the Pittsburgh Steelers go. My biggest takeaways when it came to week 3 of OTAs was along the same lines, but really what we were looking for going into week 3 was you started to kind of see the adjustments made. You started seeing this team come together, and not emotionally, not mentally, but actually game plan wise. Like, you saw the offensive line start to take shape. You saw the defense start to take shape. You saw the wide receiver room starting to take shape. You saw these things begin to happen. And I think that's what I was looking for. And that's what I mentioned last week when we talked about heading into week 3. What are you looking for? What's the biggest thing on your mind that you think could help the Pittsburgh Steelers that you want to see on the field? And I mentioned Troy Fautanu being the guy that starts playing a side of the line and the Steelers starting to mesh that offensive line together. You got that. You didn't get that with Troy Fautanu. He's still behind Dan Moore and Broderick Jones, but you got that with Zach Frazier. By the end of the week, Zach Frazier was taking team 1 reps, and I think that's significant. I think that you're starting to see the Pittsburgh Steelers build that offense and put it together. You saw more Quez Watkins and Van Jefferson and Scotty Miller being utilized in different ways instead of just a bunch of wide receivers constantly rotating in. You saw on defense that they had their cornerbacks in the slot, and that is Cam Sutton and Josiah Scott. You saw Jalen Elliott start to make some moves there. You saw Patrick Queen and Landon Roberts really take on, I mean, they are already taking on pretty big roles, but you saw a lot of them, and you saw them utilized in packages that maybe you thought the Steelers would mix and match and try to get other guys in there. You saw more Nick Herbig and Jeremiah Moon out there, and Isaiah Loudermilk and DeMarvin Leal. You saw more Dean Lowry. I just felt like together, my biggest takeaway was the Pittsburgh Steelers started to come as a whole. It started to be, okay, we have our team, we have our roster. I get it, there's 90 guys here, and you got to figure out who makes the end of this depth chart. But they're getting a lot of work on the guys that are up front and leading the pack in every position. And I think that's huge because the more work those guys can get together, the stronger this team's going to be come September or whatever.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm glad you brought up, especially like, Zach Frazier stepping up and taking some first team reps, because I think this is the part in the calendar. Those first couple weeks, it seemed like there was a lot of experimenting. It was a lot of figuring out what we have of this new group of guys. There were some sure things, obviously, with guys returning on the roster, but there were a lot of new faces that you needed to sort through. It seems like they're getting sorted through, and kind of the cream of the crop is rising to the top. Like the guys that you think are going to be frontline starters, the guys who are going to have to carry the load for this team have started to emerge. And the Steelers are kind of putting some more on their plate, especially those new guys. Like I think the wide receiver room, like you pointed out the offensive line, but I think the wide receiver room is another place where that's happening like a lot. Like it's a lot more, Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins kind of separating themselves alongside George Pickens, and then maybe there's a little bit of Scotty Miller mixed in there. There's a little bit of Marquez Callaway, but like there's a clear kind of first tier to second tier emerging, and the guys are starting to kind of separate, and I think acknowledge that. And sign of a team that kind of is starting to figure itself out. I think they're at least kind of knowing what their personnel are and how they need to organize themselves on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's exactly what you're looking for. It's early. You want to figure out who's at the end of this roster. You want to figure out who your sleepers are. You want to go find those diamonds in the rough. I agree with all that. I think the Steelers are looking for a Super Bowl. The Steelers look for a team or seem like a team that understands how talented this roster is as a whole. They have their holes, obviously, but in a general sense, they're a pretty good roster. And they want to just find out how good they could possibly be, and they want these guys to look as good as possible come the end of training camp. So I think that's exactly where you want to be, and that's exactly where the Pittsburgh Steelers seem to be as they leave OTAs and head into minicamp. There's more to talk about, obviously. Let's dive into some sleepers. Who were your sleepers of week 3, and really all of OTAs, if you have any, as we leave the South Side, prepare to head back to the South Side for mandatory minicamp?
Yeah, I think the first one that I'm going to lead with is one that I don't know if he's very much of a sleeper. I mean, I didn't notice him for the first couple weeks of OTAs very much, but Nick Herbig looked awesome this week. Like, I think it's, if this guy was on any other team, I think he'd be a star. If he wasn't sitting behind Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt, I think we'd hear a lot more about him. And I think he's in line for a big year. I think it's going to be a lot more, during the regular season. Like, they're going to be able to share the kind of quote unquote starters reps with TJ and Alex Highsmith. Herbig's going to be able to mix in there. It's incredible what he kind of did in space in one drill against, like, it was 3 reps against Jalen Warren. He was doing a backs on backers drill, and he smothers him all 3 times. Like, Jalen had no prayer of getting past him. Thought it was really impressive what he was able to do in space there. I think his speed really showed. And he looks a little bit bigger too. I think that's just part of natural growth from year 1 to year 2. So I'd say, first of all, Nick Herbig was my biggest one. And then I'm also going to throw out Connor Hayward. Like, it might just be a guy who's, Mr. June. What month are we in? Yeah, we're in June. Like, he's a Mr. June. He can kind of do everything in OTAs. And by the time the regular season comes around, he's not a huge part. But for right now, Connor Hayward looks like a guy who can play a bunch of different positions. He can be a tight end. He can be kind of an H-back, play in the backfield, or he can play some slot receiver too. Like, I think he's got really reliable hands. I think he's a good route runner. I would love to see more of him as like a blocker and see if he can do some of the dirty work too. But I love the kind of Swiss Army knife that they have in Connor Hayward. He's made a bunch of plays, I felt like, during OTAs, and I'm kind of excited to see more of him and see if that can turn into something actually usable during the regular season.
I'm glad that you brought up the Herbig versus Jalen Warren thing, because I talked to Jalen Warren about that, and I was with you. Herbig won all 3 of those. I definitely think Herbig won all 3 of those. You asked Jalen Warren, he went 2-1. That's what Jalen said. He's like,
sure.
I don't know, man. He had me on the first one. I came back on the second one, and I think, honestly, the third one, I would have got around him. I was like, okay, Jalen, whatever you want to say, pal. You were in the drill. I wasn't in the drill, but
the last one, Jalen got stopped in his tracks. He wasn't even able to run through the end, like, not even in a fake, like, oh, Herbig would have made the tackle, but just didn't go all the way through. Like, yeah, look, sorry, Jalen.
I was with you. I sat there. Look, if you are staring an NFL player in the face 6 inches from him, you know what I mean? You don't argue. No, I agree, man. That's what we're going to put on paper, is you saying that you think that you won all 3 of those. And trust me when I say I will quote you directly, because that's how we handle things. I think Nick Herbig, I've been a big Nick Herbig guy from the start this offseason. I think he's going to have a massive impact on the Pittsburgh Steelers defense this year. The dude just looked good last year, and he's a 4th-round pick who needed to grow a little bit. In the words of his brother, he's a stud. He's super athletic. He could play any of the gaps if you use him as that 3rd outside linebacker. And having TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith and then Marcus Golden last year, I think people really undervalue what that does for people. Like, if it was nobody, if it was just, oh yeah, Bud Dupree and Marcus Golden were out there and you got to learn from some quality vets who have a lot of experience, but they've never really been superstars, yeah, that helps a little bit. TJ Watt is the best edge rusher in football. To get to learn from that guy, and he's a guy who, like, I don't think TJ Watt was born and just became the best edge rusher in football. TJ Watt learned how to be the greatest from his brother, who at a time was the greatest, which helps him then teach Nick Herbig potentially how to be the greatest. I feel like that's the progression that we're seeing here. And I'm not saying Nick Herbig is going to be the next TJ Watt. I'm just saying that he's getting to learn from a guy who learned how to do it, which is super beneficial. And I think he's going to be massive. Connor Hayward's a dude. Mr. June, he's not like Gunnar Hayward or Gunnar Olszewski, Mr. June, where it's like, this guy's always open. He's going to be a stud. And then the season shows up and he does absolutely nothing. Connor Hayward's going to make an impact. But you're right. Connor Hayward is always one of the most notable players on the field during this time of year. And I think that's because the Steelers don't use him during the season as much as they use him during minicamp and OTAs, and maybe we're just not looking at it. Maybe he's not open. I have no idea. But he does come up with crazy catches during this time of year. He's got potentially the best hands on the field outside of George Pickens when everybody's out there. It's crazy. If this dude was 6'3" and just a little bit more athletic, I think he'd be a superstar in the making. But you're right. He does look good, and he always looks good. And I think that's promising to have a guy who I look at Connor Hayward as in, if you're just going to stick him out there and be like, hey, go catch a 6-yard pass, we need 6 yards, that's Mr. Reliable right there. You know, you got a really good shot of Connor Hayward making a play and catching a football, especially in traffic, because he does it all the time, if you need an easy route where he could get open. I feel like Connor Hayward's a dude who, I mean, I'm excited to see. This is year 3 for Connor Hayward, so I'm excited to see what year 3 does bring for that guy. Go ahead.
Do you mind if I say one more thing about Nick Herbig? Like, you made the point about him getting taught by TJ Watt. You actually see Nick Herbig now teaching some of these other guys.
Yes.
Like, he's, the Jeremiah Moons. I forget. I don't know if it was Jeremiah Moon specifically, but there was one time where they had just wrapped up a drill, but I could see Nick Herbig going through pass rush moves with a younger guy, giving him pointers, showing him the ropes too. And I think that was a big sign of growth as well. So that's another reason why I'm real excited about Nick Herbig. He's taking this knowledge and he's putting it into action with other people as well.
Yeah, I agree. Nick Herbig is a dude that Steelers fans should be excited for, because I think year 2 is going to be massive. And I agree with you. I think that you get to see that, which is very cool. I have 2 sleepers as well. I've mentioned them a couple times on the show. I'll continue to mention them until they're no longer sleepers. The first one is Jalen Elliott, and I laugh. I was laughing to you yesterday. I was telling you this. We were sitting there at practice, and I'm looking, and I usually don't read the YouTube comments. I try to filter them out and find the good ones, because I appreciate everybody who makes good comments on here. Like I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. A lot of comments, especially on YouTube, is just toxic, and you gotta ignore them. But when you click on the app, it tells you the first comment that was made. Boom, pops it right up there. And the first comment that was made on yesterday's show was, Jalen Elliott isn't a real dude on this roster. And I was like, yeah, I'm staring right at him, pal.
How much you want to bet?
I'm pretty sure that's him. I've been looking at him all day. I actually talked to him after practice, introduced myself, went up and said, hey, I'm Noah. And his response, as crazy as it was, hey, I'm Jalen. And I was like, there it is, confirmed. Jalen Elliott is in the building. Couldn't believe it. He's looked very impressive. He looks like a strong communicator, a dude who kind of has a veteran presence to him. And he is a veteran at this point. He's been in the league a couple of years and never really stuck to a roster, but he just looks like a guy that's comfortable out there. He seems like somebody who's really caught on to this defense in the, I don't want to say short amount of time. He bounced back and forth from the practice squad last year, spent a little bit of the summer with them in 2023. I think he's been around long enough to actually understand what's going on, have a relationship with guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick and Joey Porter Jr., and I think that goes a long way. He just looks like a dude who could make some noise at training camp, who could come in here and come up with a couple of big plays and really start to push himself as a person who maybe makes the 53-man roster. It stinks that the safety room is so loaded and you have guys like DeMonte Casey and Miles Killebrew who aren't going to miss the roster. But Jalen Elliott, has the potential to really push himself onto that last or one of those last roster spots, especially if he could play well in special teams. My other guy is running back Aaron Shaplin, who continues to impress. Harvard guy, stands out, really electric on the field, has a couple of really good bursts, especially when he gets to the second level. Got to put pads on, got to see if he could get hit by Mark Robb and Landon Roberts and Patrick Queen and stand back up, or if he could hold his own against those guys. But in helmets and shorts, he's got the speed, he looks very, very comfortable in an offense, which I'm sure going to Harvard helps you learn any NFL offense with ease. But he's a dude that stood out for me right from the jump and continues to impress. And I've talked to other people who are at practice who feel the same way. So I'm not alone on thinking that Aaron Chaplin is a dude who might really shine in training camp. And I think he's a name that we start paying attention to.
Yeah, I agree on both counts. I mean, Elliott, it's a guy who's only in his third. I think he's in his fourth year. He's played 3 years, but he looks a lot older out there. You know, he looks like a guy who has really been around the block, even though he sort of hasn't. And your point about him making the 53 man, I think it's like almost to the point where you feel like you have to protect him a little bit. Like if you put him, you drop him to the practice squad, I think there's a pretty decent chance that, you know, after he puts some stuff on film, after he puts some preseason tape out there, people are going to be interested in him. You know, the safety market isn't crazy. Not like teams are dying to sign certain guys right now. I think when you get later in the summer, there's going to be a rush. People are going to realize it's kind of a need. And Elliott could be someone who fills a fairly significant need for someone. So I think the Steelers would be wise to protect him a little bit, to try to keep him on the 53-man roster, not only because he's a good player, but because, you know, if you lose him, I think if you don't protect him, I think he could be gone for good. And the other name you brought up, I'm already,
Aaron Chaplin.
Champlin. Yeah. I mean, that guy's been awesome since the start, man. Like it's all 3 weeks. He's been really, really consistent. I think we noticed him right away. First week of OTAs, there wasn't a ton of reason to talk about him, but man, Eddie Faulkner just keeps pulling running backs out of nowhere, man. Like,
yes,
it's a little crazy. Like it's a strong running backs room, and Champlin has looked like one of the better guys in there. He's got some power, like you said, got some speed as well. And I completely agree. I've been really impressed with him. I'm not sure where he fits on the roster, quite honestly. Like you said, it's a crowded running backs room, and he'd have to make some kind of impression as a special teamer, which I don't think he has yet. But I wouldn't count him out. And I think of this deep running backs room, he's been one of, if not the most impressive guys out there.
Yeah, I think it's early to look at any of these guys. I mean, Connor Hayward, Nick Herbig, they're making the roster, but Connor Hayward's going to have to fight. But I think he still makes the roster. Chaplin and Elliott are guys that we won't know how close they are to the 53-man roster until the end of July, until the beginning of August, but we'll probably get a pretty good read early. And I think Chaplin is a guy that you could look at early and see, okay, we knew Jalen Warren was going to make this roster pretty immediately. Maybe we'll see the same thing in him. But again, once those pads come on and those backs versus backers line up in the corner of the end zone, that's when we'll know. You know, nothing matters until you line up across from a Landon Robertson. There's nothing in front of you. It is just him running full speed at you, trying to kill you. At that moment, you find out if this is real or not real. And we'll find that out come the first week of August, just about. They actually just announced their training camp schedule now. So I would imagine the first week of August is when we get things kicking. All right, let's talk quarterback battle and wide receivers. We'll start with the quarterback battle update. Your thoughts? We're 3 weeks into OTAs. I don't know. What do you look at when you look at these guys? Anything standing out? Your thoughts on if it's a real battle?
Yeah, I still don't think it's a super real battle. And if there is one, I think Russell Wilson is winning it pretty handily. I think Russ had a pretty decent head start on Justin Fields, and he hasn't really expanded on that lead, I wouldn't say. In fact, I think Fields actually has looked a lot better over the past couple weeks than he did the first one. I think it was a really rough first week, but I think he's kind of honing the power in his arm. You know, it's not just all about throwing that ball 100 miles an hour or as hard as he can. It's about putting the ball in the right place, making sure your receiver can catch it, developing a rhythm a little bit. And I think both quarterbacks have done that to a certain extent. But Russ has been the more consistent one, the more accurate one, made some plays with his legs too. I'm just interested to see how, I mean, you were the one who actually pointed this out. But these guys hold on to the ball quite a bit, you know, both of them do. And, you know, it's a little different from when we would complain about Kenny holding on to the ball. You know, Kenny is sitting in the pocket, holding on to the ball, but these guys, you know, it's clear when they have a good read on their internal clock, I think, because even when they're in 7-on-7, when they're doing 11-on-11 and no one can hit them, they are making the right play to, avoid whatever theoretical pressure is coming their way. They're rolling out, they're making things happen in the scramble drill, they're extending plays. That's the interesting part of it. I think Russ is going to have to do a lot to keep up with Justin in that extent.
Yeah.
I think Russ is a fine athlete, but Justin Fields is the much better athlete. And if, scramble drill, keeping plays live, if that's going to be an important part of the Steelers offense, then Russ is going to have to make some strides there. Still early, but I still think that Russ kind of, that pole position, he's kind of maintaining that lead that he has on Fields right now. And it's going to be pretty hard for Fields to overcome that, especially in minicamp going forward.
Yeah, I still don't look at this as a real competition. I think it's got real in it, but it's clearly Russell Wilson's job, and I think that's okay. Russell Wilson hasn't looked bad, and I like that Justin Fields has taken steps forward. I don't think Justin Fields needs to come out here and win the competition to still be a very promising member of this roster. I don't think he has to come in here and be like, oh man, he was so good. And I don't think it's bad if he doesn't win the roster, because what we've seen from day one and the last day of OTAs was constant progress. And that's a good thing, because you're looking at Justin as a guy that's learning from Russ, that's learning under Arthur Smith, that's learning from Tom Arth, who has an opportunity to grow in a place that's consistent, because he hasn't had consistency his entire career. That's important. That's where the Steelers stand. And if that's all you get from Justin Fields this summer is consistency and progress every single week, that's a great summer for Justin Fields. That's exactly what you're looking for if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, is Justin Fields to, at the end of the summer, look like a guy that, yeah, he took a lot of strides this summer. He took a lot of strides during OTAs, minicamp, and training camp. That's all you're looking for. But when it comes to a quarterback competition, this is still Russ's job. And he hasn't looked bad. Just like you said, he hasn't looked bad. There hasn't been. I mean, Justin's got the upper hand on the athleticism. It's crazy when you're standing there and Justin Fields is just running all over the field, making craziness happen, and then finds a guy in the end zone or whatever. That's just, Russ doesn't do those things, but at the same time, when pads are on and there's no coaches there to set screens from and that kind of stuff, does it work? We don't know. We'll find out. Russ looks just as athletic as you'd want him to look, and I think when it comes to holding the ball too long, I think both of them are holding the ball too long. I think Russ is holding it a little less long, which is good, but definitely a little PTSD from the Kenny Pickett days of, are you going to throw this? Are you not going to throw this? What's going to happen here? The only difference is that neither of them roll to the left immediately. No jab at Kenny. That's just where we stand when it comes to what Justin and Russ are doing. And I think that'll come, because I think the big question, and I said this to you yesterday, the big question is, are they holding the ball too long, or is there nobody open? And we'll continue to learn that as things go. But I agree with you. I think this is Russ's job. Maybe things change, but right now it's tough to see an instance where things do change.
Yeah, definitely. And it's tough for Justin, because I'm sure it's frustrating for him to sit like that. He came in here saying that he didn't come here to be a backup or anything, but sorry, man, like you probably are going to be for a while.
Somebody should have stopped him and been like, hey, dude, have you been paying attention? Did Mike really have a conversation with you? Because we were told Mike had a conversation with you that this isn't a competition. So just in case you forgot, just in case, words weren't said the right way, we'll let you know that it's not real. But yeah, I agree. Let's finish it off with the wide receivers. This is a big one. We're 3 weeks in. Who stood out to you at wide receiver? Who's been your guys? The Steelers are still hunting for a wide receiver too. Do they have any options that seem good enough in your eyes?
Yeah, honestly, I've said this a couple times, but I don't hate this wide receivers room as much as I thought that I might, or I'm not as pessimistic as I thought I might be. But I think the one who really stood out to me this week, and the one who's kind of been real consistent, real steady, is Van Jefferson. I think this week especially, he made some big plays, had some nice catches, and kind of all over the field in a bunch of different contexts too. Like he was down the field a little bit. He was making catches along the sideline. He was turning short throws into yards after the catch, finding open gaps, stretching downfield a little bit too. He doesn't seem like he's a big play threat in the same way that, like Quez Watkins had some bombs thrown to him that he's hauled in.
Yeah.
Roman Wilson, I think, has had a couple thrown his way as well. There have been guys who've done that. Jefferson hasn't really been that guy, but he's been real consistent. You don't see him drop passes. He always knows what he's doing. Obviously, he's a veteran who's been there and done that. But I think really looking to prove himself, prove that he can be, he's been a wide receiver 3 for most of his career at best, maybe a wide receiver 4. And I think he's trying to make a leap to wide receiver 2. And I think it's possible that that leap looks so much more possible after this week than it did after the first 2 weeks of OTA. So my pick would be Van Jefferson. I thought he had a great week.
Yeah, I think that's the easy pick. Is Van Jefferson looks like the most consistent, most natural, most veteran leadership. He looks like a guy who's been here, done that, won some Super Bowls, wears some dog chain necklaces. For those of you who don't know, Van Jefferson rocks a bone chain necklace, and he said that it was a gift from the Super Bowl. I hope he got his ring. That's the running joke between all of us and him is I hope he got his ring as well, but he rocks some dog chain, some dog bones on his neck. I think he looks the most impressive, most consistent. I'm not totally sold that he is a wide receiver 2, and I'd like to see him put some pads on, and we'll see what happens when him and Joey Porter kind of butt heads during training camp. I think that's when we'll have a real understanding of how good he could be if he could fill the wide receiver 2 role. But I do agree with you that he is the most consistent. He's been the guy that stands out of all of them. Quez Watkins might be close to, I would say. He's had some guys or some plays that he's hit deep. He's outrun some guys. He's looked pretty smooth. He's much bigger than I expected him to be, but he still runs just as fast. And to be honest with you, this is not a wide receiver 2. This guy can't be a wide receiver 2. But Scotty Miller's looked pretty good.
Yeah,
Scotty Miller is not. He's not looked bad. He's made a couple of good catches. He's gotten open. He continues to. He looks like a veteran. He looks like a guy that he knows how to play football for what he could do. He's been impressive. Again, Scotty Miller's not a wide receiver 2. You're not going to make him into a wide receiver 2, but I think if we're going to talk who's been the most impressive, maybe not the most consistent, maybe doesn't have the most upside, but the most impressive, Scotty Miller might be that guy. Could be that guy.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing. Like, this offense is clearly going to be passing game by committee. You know, there will be George Pickens, there will be some Pat Freiermuth, and the running game is going to be the running game. But the rest of this, they're going to kind of have to put the pieces together, you know, from this kind of, not the scrap heap, that's the wrong word, but just kind of this collection of guys that, you know, all have certain skills. None of them are superstars, but they're going to have to pull this together from that group of guys. And I think there's a role for Miller in a situation like that, a guy who has some speed, could be a deep threat for you, could, you know, take some jet sweeps, could do some different things for you. I like Scotty Miller a lot. I think he's fun to watch play football. It's clearly a guy who, you know, enjoys the game as much as anyone out there. He's having so much fun while he's out there, so he's fun to watch. But yeah, I think he's been much more impressive than I thought. You know, like I don't know. I feel bad. When he got signed, I think we were doing a podcast and it was,
it was bad.
It was like, oh, great. Another, you know, wide receiver 4 or whatever. Like, this is awesome. But Miller has, I think, outplayed our expectations of him when he first arrived.
Yeah, I agree. He's fun. He's cool. He's got some electric moments, and he's just, I don't know if reliable is the word, but he tries. Like, that's you get a guy, Justin Fields is running all over the field trying to just avoid everybody as linemen are just chilling, and Scotty Miller's still running around looking to get open, doing everything he possibly can for these guys. That's somebody that you want on the football field. Scotty Miller's been impressive. I'm excited to see what happens when he puts pads on, because a guy that size could become a Gunnar Olszewski, but there's something about me. He's done this before. He's been there. He's won some Super Bowls. I think playing with a guy like Tom Brady helps. I think you learn some things that most people can't learn when you play with a guy like that. So I'm very excited to see what Scotty brings to training camp. And I'm excited for the fans to kind of get a look at Scotty Miller and be like, oh, okay, look at this guy actually is kind of fun to watch, because that'll go a long way in people realizing that maybe he isn't just a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. But again, we head into minicamp. That's the next step. We'll have plenty to talk about next week. With that said, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, and make sure to find all of our work at si.com/NFL. Steelers. We will be back on Monday. Enjoy another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.